Hi everybody, today I chat with Helena Zhang. Helena is a very talented designer whose expertise and interest spans a variety of areas. Now, most of you know that I love all things related to pixel art. Recently, Helena created the fantastic font Departure Mono. Yes, it's a pixel font. Yes, it's also monospaced, which means that it is flexible for a lot of use cases and it looks really cool. When I dug deeper into it and realized Helena was behind it, I want to chat with her more to both learn about her design interests as well as touch upon a topic that I am not very familiar with, which is what goes into creating a font. So in this very visual chat, Helena shares a mind map of all the inputs that went into designing and creating Departure Mono, and along the way we touch upon a bunch of other topics, including a look at some of the pixel art inspired content that has been popular across a variety of mediums for the past few decades. This is going to be a blast and it's going to be a fun chat, so you don't want to miss it. Let's get started. All right, Helena, it is great to chat with you. The introduction, I talked about Departure Mono, the pixel font you created, which got me introduced to your work. And then digging into your work a little bit more, I realized that you have a lot of really interesting things that you've been working on and you're currently working on. So I figured let's chat and learn more about yourself and definitely how the pixel font Departure Mono came about. And of course, we'll touch upon a billion other topics along the way.
Sure.
So welcome.
Thank you so much, Karupa. Thanks for having me.
So how did you get started? And let's go all the way back in time, because I'm
Mhm.
always curious to know, how everyone got into this world of tech, given the millions of options that have always existed. It's a passion project to be able to
Right.
want to work in this area and then dive deep into this to not just make a career out of it, but also contribute back to the larger ecosystem. So I just want to go back in time to see what was it that motivated you to get into this fun world.
Yeah, we can go way back. So usually I start, I was always an artsy kid. And I remember at a very young age, I would go to the bookstore and kind of just camp out in the graphic design section. I was really into that. So I just was like voraciously absorbing all the books there. And on the digital side, I started making websites when I was 11 or 12. I started tinkering with HTML and such. And just kind of had fun with it. At that time, the patterns weren't defined yet, so it was kind of a playground for me to just try different things. And you can see that thread. I'm still making websites today. And fast forward a little bit from then, I went to art school and I found some of that stuff pretentious. So I kind of, luckily I had design, always in my background.
When you're building websites, what do you
Mhm.
remember what tools you were using?
In the very beginning, it was just like a pure HTML, CSS. Actually, I remember before CSS came out. That's I'm dating myself a bit, but um, it was very very simple, and I would just was seeing what I could do with that. Of course, there was GeoCities. I remember I had a GeoCities site. I would pay a lot of money to see my early websites. I don't really have a good capture of those, but and then I know you were, really into Flash. I wasn't so much a Flash person, and all that action script and stuff. But I remember there was I would call it the Squarespace of Flash, it was called Moonfruit, and you could kind of set up your own website and very quickly. And yeah, so those were fun times.
Yeah, well, I mean, looking
Mhm.
backwards, it was probably the best that you did not get into Flash because I think your HTML,
Yeah,
CSS, and
right.
JavaScript skills probably are relevant today, whereas a lot of us within the Flash world, the visual stuff, of course, still there, but I think a lot of the
Mhm.
tribal knowledge we gained from it is pretty much lost in time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you never know. Maybe there's
Archive.org.
going to be a resurgence, or there's
There
there's
is,
definitely
the
a lot
funny
of
thing is
nostalgia in
that
the air.
very much so. A lot of people keep pinging me and saying there's a tool called Ruffle, which turns your old Flash files into WebAssembly that runs natively in
Hmm.
your browser. So there's a resurgence of a lot of people actually using Adobe Animate, and some people even have old versions of Flash lying around that they managed to get working on their modern versions of Mac OS and Windows and actually have content that's being created now. I think the gaming community is really huge into Flash because that's always been a big place that Flash is relevant in, but I'm
Yeah.
seeing more and more Ruffle links on various things I see around me. So who knows? There may be a resurgence of it, but I think it's not going to be as influential though as it was back in the day.
Right.
So from there, you created both well, the icon library, of course, came first. What was the
Yeah.
motivation behind creating the Phosphor icons? Because I'm looking at the icons, there's a lot of icons there. And having done
Yeah.
one icon my entire lifetime, which is my orange logo, it takes a lot of effort and takes a lot of consideration on how that's all done. So I'm curious to know, like, what was the initial genesis of the idea for it, and then you going all the way and creating an icon for so many common scenarios.
Sure. Yes. I'm going to scroll through. Can you see the site right
Yes,
now?
I can.
Okay. I'm going to scroll through just to set some context for people on what this is and what it looks like. There are, I think there's like over 9,000 icons to date, and it's growing. There's, different weights that you have. This started during the pandemic, and yeah, I think when you have a little bit of space like that, and I was stuck at home, and this kind of just came about. Just started tinkering with it. Um, Iconography is something I always worked on all my projects, so I would really roll my own icons for whatever company I was working for, whatever client, and I think it's a pretty underserved area. I do think it's changing a lot recently. I'm seeing a lot of icon designers working, and a lot of people, making their own icons, and a lot of education around it too. Um, but I think previously it seemed like, you know, typography it is more of the leading element in a design usually. But I think icons are pretty underserved, and sometimes you just, um, it isn't given as much thought. So that's something I always cared about because I care about all the details. I think everything matters in whatever you're building and designing. So always had it interested in them, and then given a little bit of time during the pandemic, this was something I started up with my partner, and it's one thing we care about a lot is offering it in a lot of different formats. So there's a Figma library, plugin, Sketch. It's available in React, Vue, lots of different ways you can use it, both for designers and developers. And we work hard to maintain that, and then we also work hard to take in requests. I think at this point, because it's quite large, it's probably serving a lot of the use cases that are needed. But we still get, we take requests through GitHub issues, and then we'll kind of sort through them and see like what would be good, what would be something that's good to add, and if something's too niche, we might not go there. But yeah.
When I looked at archive.org for your icons, the first version of the site, I think at least account archive.org was in like October of 2020, and you had 3,500 icons, and then now you have, like you mentioned, over 9,000. Did
Yeah.
you start up with, did you wait to get all 3,000 icons before you decided to share it to the public, or did you have earlier versions of it that were just sharing in smaller sizes?
Yeah, I think I'm trying to remember the first release. I believe we had 588 icons times 6 weights. So that whatever that comes out to, maybe it's 3,000. We did, I think we did, decide to come out with like a solid set before releasing the first version. Maybe enough to really cover the most common cases of like search icon settings, things like that. And then it kind of grew from there.
Very cool. Now, I know you created a mind map in Figma that walks through
Yes.
not just like departure mono, but also the inspiration behind how you got there. I feel like this would be a good segue to get into that because I think that covers a lot of the things that I think you and I want to talk about as well.
Sure. Yeah. I can give a quick overview just to set the scene of what we're looking at, and for the people listening in that don't have the luxury of a being at a screen right now. We're looking at this kind of mind map, big graph with a lot of different nodes, where we have departure mono, and the font that I recently released, and then a lot of the inspiration that went behind it. So at a very high level, there's sci-fi references, movies and film, references from NASA, paper ephemera, which I really love, collecting vintage ephemera, type foundries and specimen sites. Yeah, lots of this stuff. You can probably find the influence in the website for departure mono, and then of course I looked at in creating the font itself. looked at a lot of monospaced fonts as that was one of the constraints, and then programming fonts because I wanted it to be useful for programmers. Um, and everything else from video games, pixel art. It is a pixel font, so pixel art, very related territory, um, and going back to like Mac Paint and making pixel art in there, that kind of thing. So there's a lot we could talk about, a lot of areas we could go to, and let me know where you want to start.
Well, let's start with the very beginning. What
Hmm.
made you decide to create a new font, and more specifically, a monospaced pixel font?
Right. Yes, it's very specific. I've always wanted to make a font, and I think I never really got around to it. It took me a while to just sit down. I started Departure Mono about 2 years ago, and uh, I think doing a pixel font is also a great entry point into making fonts. This is my first one, so I think giving yourself a constraint like that is really helpful just to start learning about, both all the ins and outs of what it takes to make a font, and then, learning the tools, all of the things that come with it. So I think it was a really great constraint, and I think we can get into this more of like what is it about pixel art and pixel fonts that we're both drawn to. Um, but yeah, always been drawn to pixel stuff. So I used that as a constraint, and then actually the first version 2 years ago was not monospace. It was a proportional font, which means each letter takes up its own width and has varied widths, and um, it also had a smaller grid, so I was working with an even tighter grid where I was actually having a lot of trouble working with, let's say, diacritics if I wanted to add that, or I'll zoom in here to give you a sense of, you know, this is the grid for Departure Mono that I ended up with, and you can see that you need a little bit of room if you want to include, this kind of accents like this acute, or you need to make room for the descenders coming down, let's say in a Q. So there was a little bit of working through like what is the grid and what does that look like when you actually type that out in a sentence or paragraph, and then the monospace came a little bit later, and it was through some input through my partner and like other folks that were like, this seemed to be more useful. Like if I can actually catch this use case of being able to code in Departure Mono, I think that would be extra cool. So I made that change at some point when I revisited it, and that worked out. So also saved me a lot of kerning, by the way, because if you do a proportional font, you have to kern different pairs of combinations of letters, basically. So I think in terms of an entry point, it was a really good set of constraints, right? The two constraints being it's a pixel font and it's monospace, and yeah, it was then was just like a lot of trial and error, learning about different details, and definitely a lot of research and looking at other fonts in this kind of family.
This is probably a very basic question. What is
Mm-hmm.
kerning?
So kerning is the spacing between two letters. So let's say between an A and a B letter, or and then that is a specific kerning between these two letters. Tracking is the spacing. Let's say you had a paragraph. It is kind of the overall spacing. So you could track something a little bit tighter. Let's say, let me see if I have a reference here that I can play with. Um, you can track something a little bit tighter, or you could say, oh, I want this to be, um, I want it to be looser, right? And then or we could say wider, and then we can space it out a little bit more.
Gotcha. In these proportional fonts, is kerning global for each letter, or do you have to special case it? Because I've definitely seen cases where when I'm typing in, like, let's say, two-letter combinations, the spacing
Mm-hmm.
between them is different than some other two-letter combinations. So are all those things that as a font designer, you have to think about and also specify in whatever format that the font needs to be represented in?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's special casing, which is, and that's what I was getting at in terms of the amount of work that goes into that. There's a lot of work that you have you kind of get your proofing text, and you have different cases that you test for, and different pairings of letters, and it takes a lot of fine adjustment to make sure that it looks good, depending on what two letters are paired together.
How much of creating Departure Mono was because you just wanted to try what it takes to design a new font versus you found a gap in existing pixel fonts that you felt were like missing that you wanted to address and move the state of the art forward in?
I think a little bit of both. Like one was just the desire to try it out and learn about it and really complete a project. There's a lot of reward in just learning how to do something, and then I do think there's probably from what you see that the end result of this it probably answers some of the things that I found were missing. That there's tons of pixel fonts out there, and there's a long history of pixel fonts, whether it's for video games or there was this phase in the around Y2K, like the early 2000s. I don't know if you remember the like tiny pixel fonts, and it was like really tiny grids of like 3 to 5 pixels.
Yeah.
That was a really fun time. And so I think I definitely have a lot of nostalgic for that time, but I think there was if you look at that, by the way, the kerning is all over the place, and it's kind of, it's really, it's endearing in a way, but I think in terms of if we're thinking about usability and utility, and let's say you did want to use it as a coding font, I think there was a lot of things missing there. So, I was exploring, like, when I was working through this, I think one of the considerations is how can I make it usable and, reduce the amount of wonkiness that, maybe some of those fonts had, but still have a little bit of personality, right? But yeah, make it a little bit more usable, I think, for wider use cases.
No, it makes a lot of sense to me. And, we can talk a little bit about what got you interested about pixel fonts in particular. You mentioned that there's a lot of inspiration and historical things that you wanted to kind of capture as part of creating this font. I spent a lot of time trying to find the right pixel font, and especially in the Flash community in the late 1990s, early 2000s, pixel fonts were great because Flash had this weird thing where they anti-aliased everything for the most part to a point where it's like extremely blurry. It was nice for larger text, but for small text, it was almost unreadable. So what a lot of people did was they set the quality in Flash to low, which meant that anti-aliasing would be turned off, which unfortunately also meant all vector shapes would also be jagged and have the sharp edges. And that became an art style of itself. I don't know if you ever followed, like, I think it is Yugo Nakamura, PlayStation, and some of those other kinds of like early generative art experiments they did back in the day. I think Yugo P was the actual website. And a lot of those experiments were very simple in terms of just lines, but the lines were exported as low quality. So it created this really artificial kind of an effect. And so all those pixel fonts were the only solution you had for having nice, curvy vectorized shapes that weren't jagged, but had text that was very, very legible. So a lot of the fonts you mentioned, I still have probably a folder of like at least hundreds of megabytes of TTF files from back then, because it's hard to find, like the Hooge fonts and the HOOGE, and then the standard underscore ones. And then I think there were a handful of ones, I'll try to find at some point. But the Silkscreen was a classic as well. That was Jason Kotke. And I actually tried using Silkscreen for my current pixel fonts that I use on my website today. I started off with Silkscreen, and I went with something else, mostly because Silkscreen is, I think, only all caps, and I needed something to be like both lowercase and all caps as well, that also wasn't massive in file size. I always was like, how can we make sure the fonts are less than about 10, 20 kilobytes in size? And all the other ones I was able to find were often in 100 kilobytes, which doesn't matter today for many people, but I've always been a stickler for how can we make things be as fast and performant as possible. And so when I found out about your font, I was like, I have to try this out. And so I haven't had a chance to do that yet, but my plan is actually put it through that works on my own personal blog and see how it all plays out. And my interest in pixel art in general is mostly as video games. I grew up playing the NES initially, and then when the Super Nintendo came out, it was like Mega Man X and also the Zelda Links to the Past, like a classic old school game from that era. And all the iconography and text was very much pixel oriented, and that was pretty much it. And so ever since then, I've always made my site's logo actually pixel text itself. And then I tried to incorporate pixel art and pixel things for a long time. And when Retina displays came into the picture, I couldn't use it anymore because on every screen, pixel icons and pixel things were blurry because the DPIs were off. And I just didn't know enough about DPIs and icon sizes and so on to be able to do a proper job with it. But about 5 years ago in CSS, they add the ability to actually have the rendering mode be in pixel format itself. So even if you had images that were different sizes, it would not anti-alias anymore. And that, I think, in some ways brought back this resurgence of pixel style visuals in everyday websites again. And that's what got me back into pixel art after having kind of abandoned it for many years because nobody could use it and see it in a way that would make sense.
Yeah. There's a lot there to dig into. I'm in this video game area now of the mind map, but you know, things, I mean, all the way back to things like Arkanoid, which you can see in the Departure Mono site. But also I think today there's a resurgence. Well, this is probably 10 years old. How old is Minecraft? But yeah,
probably
there's
10 or more. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe 10. So maybe not so fresh, but there are newer references of, people using pixel fonts. And, I think this Minecraft is a great example where they've kind of brought it back a little bit here. And I think I'm just feeling a lot of excitement from the industry too on pixel stuff. And I'm excited to see what people make with that. I want to go back to Silkscreen, which you mentioned. This was one of the fonts I remember from back in the day. And yeah, I loved it. It was very small. I think let's see what the height is here. It's only 5 pixels tall. That's really small to work with. As you mentioned, it's all caps. So that was one of the constraints, right? Like that, or limitations, I should say, that I think Departure Mono tries to answer. Like, okay, it's a full alphabet, uppercase, lowercase, different Latin languages, including different diacritics. And now I'm currently working on expanding it to Cyrillic as well, which I'm not familiar with it. So I'm actually, working with the community to work on that and test it. But that is, I think that's important for me for this font, is that it can be usable for a lot of people in a lot of different use cases. And, if I'm able to expand the languages, great. I think the grid is probably too small for something like Chinese, but yeah, we'll see what happens with that. But, I think expanding it to Cyrillic and then Greek as well. There's some basic Greek in there, but it would be great to make that a little bit more fully supported.
Yeah. And, 5 pixels today seems like very small, but I always feel like, at least my fuzzy recollection of the time back then was that a lot of our monitors were maybe 1024 by 768 was like the most common resolution. And if you maybe had like 1280 by 1024 if you had like a more recent monitor. But I felt like in those days, 5 pixels was actually not that small. It's like, okay, that's pretty, reasonably sized. And I think, all of them had to be like multiples of 8 anyway. So your font size had to be 8 pixels or 16 or 24. And I don't know if that was different though for Silkscreen. Like, was it multiples of 5? I forget those details at this point.
That's a good point, actually, because if you're looking at this is like some old Mac Paint references, but this screen was probably something like 640 by 3. No, I'm going to butcher it. 480 or something. It didn't actually need to. I guess 1 pixel took up more space. So yeah.
Which is a challenge, of course, as I highlighted earlier, of using some of those fonts from back in the day in today's time, is that little things that have just evolved in terms of how fonts and text are rendered kind of goes counter to how that is done. Nice. K10K, classic.
Yeah. This has been coming up a lot. I don't know if you felt this, but people are talking about Calibre 10K a lot.
Yeah,
but you could
K10K.
see, like, yeah, I mean, all the pixel details here. It was all pixels.
There's this personality. I look at K10K at least like once every couple of months, mostly because I just want to kind of go back to like what did we kind of lose in like the evolution of design since then, and what did we gain as well as a part of it. And I always felt K10K was a great example of it, and that's what they're their sister website, I think Cuban Council. I think that was I think the
Yeah,
creators of Kit
right.
and K
Cuban Council.
had Cuban Council running at the same time. And I think there was Ultra Shock was the other pixel, like, they had like heavy pixel related content as well. But no, this is all really fun things to see. And most of there's images. I think today we can actually create a lot of this using just CSS, but there was no CSS positioning, anything like that back then. So all these were like 9-grid tables where you literally had 9 cells in a table, and then you put images in each section to create this like rich border that worked, because
Right. You
it didn't
got
work
to
in
get the
modern
corners
browsers
and
or old
everything.
browsers.
Yeah, yeah. A lot more. It was a lot more that went into it. By the way, so you mentioned there were some things that maybe we lost and some things that we gained. What do you think those things are?
I think the thing we lost was personality. Every website I see today tends to follow a very similar pattern. There's like, let's say there's like 8 different templates of how a hero page should look like, or how a call to
Hmm.
action should be optimized for, and so on. And the bigger difference is like maybe it's gradient versus solid color and things like that. But every website looks very similar to every other website. And if I kind of squint my eyes, I'm like, this site looks the same as this site, looks the same as the other one. And I felt back then, I think there was no real established patterns in terms of how things should be done. Now, I'm not going to say that Kate and K probably hit all the right bars in terms of usability, accessibility, and things like that. And so I
Hmm.
think those are some of the things that could have been improved from the websites from that era. But the amount of sheer uniqueness of it was very much something that I feel like we lost. Because I noticed that you also have Habbo Hotel here. And I visited Habbo Hotel
Yeah.
actually last week just to see like what's going on there, because that was one of the first experiences I ever had of like something done in the browser that was one, I could create my own room. I didn't have to do anything extra for it. And then people could come see my room, and I could just navigate randomly, and I would be interacting with actual people that were doing things. Because the only other example I had was Microsoft had a chat application in the late 1990s. I think it was called Microsoft Chat. And there are
Hmm.
2 modes of how you can connect to an IRC server. You could chat in text as usual, or you could create this fake comic strip. And that fake comic strip had like different characters you can choose and so on. And I found all this to be like early versions of what ultimately became MySpace and social media, of a way of like personalizing an experience that is different for every individual. Because most then it was just, you just got what the developer said you're getting. And so those were early examples of it that always stuck in my head as something that was very, very nicely done. And of course, Habbo Hotel is like classic, because it also reminded me of Zelda, Link to the Past.
Yeah, yeah. I haven't thought about this in a long time actually, but I came across it working on this font.
Yeah, they still
Um,
maintained a lot of their style. The thing is, there was another website that was competing with Habbo Hotel. I
mhm.
forgot its name completely. Very similar in style, but it was much larger and it wasn't fully pixelated. They had a lot of vector shapes that truly showed up as nice vector that were actually, nicely anti-aliased and things like that. If I can remember that, I'll try to bring it up. But
Yeah.
I think it was a definitely a .uk domain name, and
Okay.
so I didn't
Yeah.
think about
Can
it.
I That's too far for me to reach into my memory.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, when you think about this is the modern reference. I mean, this to me has so much of Habbo Hotel in it. I don't know if you've used this tool, Gather, um,
I have
where
not.
you can basically we can join a meeting as we are now, and we each have our avatar. We can walk around the space, and we can. It has a very cool audio component where if I walk close to you, it will start the video and audio. So it's kind of simulating being in an office, let's say. And uh, yeah,
Yeah,
check it out. It's pretty
I
cool.
have actually used it. I didn't realize it. I just
Mhm.
went to our website right now. There were some team events that we had just for fun a couple of months ago, maybe over a year ago, and it was actually
Yeah,
on Gather.town. We were all like walking in this virtual environment, and then we could chat with people when we got closer to them, and so on.
nice, nice.
No, this is very, very cool. And in video games, when I look at indie games, like the games that are built by like
Mhm.
one or two like small development teams for various platforms, pixel art is still all the rage. I see it in so many situations where they're using it as their primary way of communicating all things that are going on.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Stardew Valley was made by one person, right?
I
I
think
think.
so. I think
Yeah,
so. Yeah, very
yeah.
beautifully done.
But yeah, what you were saying about, I think, a lot of people in the industry are feeling this way that, we have We maybe lost some of the personality or just weirdness of websites back in the day before we had figured things out, and we gained a lot of, let's say accessibility is one area, right, where um, definitely those tiny pixel fonts were not accessible back in the day.
No.
um, so there's a lot that we gained, and I think it's as it has matured, it has, we've gotten better at some things like that. And but I also will say it's really up to us to bring some of that back, right? And just because there are established patterns, and maybe every website has like a header that's centered, but you don't have to do that. And I think one reference I'll point to, that this was probably the biggest inspiration behind the departure monospecimen site, Grilly Type. This Type Foundry puts out the best mini sites for their different fonts. So this is not the best representation because it's static screenshots, but if you were to go to, I think I can actually probably just pull one up. This is a new one that they released just yesterday, actually. And I'll just give you a preview of like.
Oh wow. Very
It's
nicely done.
it's incredibly fun. It's a beautiful showcase of their typefaces, and not everyone loves the scrolly telling, where you're telling the story and you're kind of like controlling the scrolling
Yeah.
effects. But yeah, I think this has so much personality. It's so wonderful. It's such a great way to show off a font. Um,
No, very much
yeah.
so. Very nicely done. I think when you get back to like also what was it about websites back then that had more personality than they are right now? I think today it's
Mhm.
just more difficult to build a website that has personality and different style. Like for example, as you're scrolling, having that kind of storytelling come into play. It's honestly very technical. It's hard to get to. And if you're using a low code tool like let's say Webflow, for example, to make this work, you can, but you're also sacrificing page size. Some of these examples might be 10, 20, 30 megabytes in size when you're going like, is it really the best use of bandwidth to be able to do this? Then you go to Apple's website, apple.com, and you look at some of their
Mm.
really nice hero graphics and the scrolling that's being shown there, and those pages like 20, 30, 40 megabytes as well. So you're like, okay, maybe the industry hasn't fully figured out how to make these work in a way where your search engine scores and all these things aren't negatively impacted by doing something very, very quirky. But I think we'll get there though, and I think we're seeing it's always a pendulum where what's old is cool again. And I think
Yep.
we're getting to that point now where both the technical capabilities to make pixel art and pixel content look nice in the browser is now available. And I think we're also getting a lot of designers who are looking back at this going like, yeah, there's some good things we can borrow from that era and meld it with the things that we learned since then around usability, accessibility, performance, and all of these things to create a next generation of what would be evolved pixel art.
Yeah.
So you have a collection of movies that played a big inspiration as well. I think that's
Mhm.
also very I
Yep.
found very interesting because you're right. A lot of movies, even ones that are done today, use pixel art and especially pixel fonts to highlight various things that are either very technical or deliberately designed to have a retro vibe.
Yeah, let's see. There's so many. What can I zoom into as a starting point? Well, okay, so I've been binging X Files, and this this is a great
Fantastic.
reference of very 90s. You can see actually this screenshot I pulled has a pixel font here, and I feel like every time they're writing their mission reports, there's a different font and interface going on. So that's been really cool to just see what kinds of things they come up with. This looks very DOSy, um, and yeah, let's see what else we got here. I mean, some of my favorites, I think the Alien franchise, I love those movies. Alien, the best one is the original, of
Of
course.
course, yes. Can't
Of
beat that.
course. This is a screenshot from, there's a lot of inspiration to be taken from their interfaces back then. Space Odyssey still stands up really well. So definitely recommend that. I mean, look at this screenshot where they're eating and these look like iPads, and this was made in
Exactly.
1968. That's
Yep.
pretty incredible. Um, so I think for me there were these were more broadly sci-fi references and not necessarily Pixel specifically, but you can see I think a lot of them do overlap, right? Because you tend to be working with let's say constrained interfaces where you're working with kind of pixely looks. So this is from Blade Runner 2049, also one of my favorites. Blade Runner, and then I would say Gmonk is the master of these kind of sci-fi interfaces. This is from
Yes.
Oblivion, and it's this just like gorgeous, really dense layouts here. And then there was like a whole table, this kind of like big table UI that they had in the movie.
Yeah. Did you ever watch the Fallout TV series?
The recent one?
Yeah.
Yes, I did.
The video game for that was always funny because the video game is set in a futuristic time, like, multiple hundreds of years after the world supposedly, ended from nuclear annihilation. But
Mhm.
because the world ended at that time, all the screens are low res, and so all the UI you'll see in the game, and of course the TV show which carried, we represented pretty faithfully, everything is pixel style. And the game itself has some fantastic elements that are highlighted, very similar to how you have UIs here from both G-Monk as well as all the Alien movies. They did a
Mm.
nice job of blending past and future and using pixel art, in all these areas where it made sense, represent the retro technology.
Yeah. Yeah, it was like stuck in the 50s basically, right?
Exactly. It's like
Yeah.
the UI language was stuck in the 50s, but they had nuclear powered everything. So like cars were like I don't know if they're flying cars, but they were self powered. You had robots that could do all kinds of things because they advanced so much in some of these areas. Yet their UI language was very much what we would consider to be like late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think there's actually something um there's an observation to be made there because we have all of this, if you think today we have all of these advanced technologies, and yet you go, you take a flight and you have this like paper paper boarding pass that's like, printed in a very lo-fi way. So I think that was some of the I think that theme I was playing with here too. It's like for the website for Departure Mono, there's a story. This astronaut or scientist is going to space, Dr. Kerning, and then is getting some sort of brief, and then going to the airport, or the airport that is maybe a spaceport, and like going to space, and then yet you have all this technology of going to space, and yet you're dealing with like paper receipts and stuff like that. So I think that contrast is kind of a real thing in our world, and something that's fun to play with, also in terms of like having analog elements here as well as very digital elements as well.
Yeah, I think the word analog I think is critical here because I was reading an article recently that talked about how vinyl records sales are like continue to go up and up year over year because people are getting back into both buying record players and buying music in vinyl because there's just something nice about it. And of course, the audio quality people say is because of the compression is significantly better than what you might hear if your ears are capable of discerning between compressed audio and like really high quality original audio. So there's
Mm-hmm.
something about there's I think it's almost this like movement where we wanted to go digital. We wanted to leave the past behind as quickly as we can to embrace what new technology was able to provide. But now that the dust has settled a bit, it's kind of like there were some things that were done back then in technology that was actually quite appealing. And the visual language of it, I think, kind of came along with it as well. So you now have this blending of old versus new, which creates the UIs that you see here. And of course, the Departure Mono webpage, absolutely love it because you didn't go all pixel art everywhere. The iconography, some of the visuals, like I think like there's like a pen or a marker. That's still very much a
Mm-hmm.
vector, but the surrounding content is still very pixel. It has like a nice blending of what would look good in pixel form and what would look better in natural vector form that I think was a nice mixture between what you're trying to balance.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was definitely playing around with both languages here.
Especially like the pattern in the right, almost like a QR code that next to the evidence of geothermal activity. I've
Ah,
seen like
yes.
the glitch textures making a comeback in so many ways as well, because back then, you look at glitch texture, you're like, okay, the designers made a mistake there, they don't know what they're doing. But now it's like seeked out, people look forward to, like, I want 4K textures that are basically just glitches like this that are being printed out. And so it's a lot of fun stuff there in that sense.
Yeah, yeah. This is I'm feeling a trend around this kind of stuff too. I've seen some dithering tools being worked on and out there. These are actually made with just the shading characters in the font. So that was something that was fun too. It was like uh, you know, challenging myself to only use, aside from these vector elements, you can see there's some flat, like you mentioned this highlighter, and then some of these backgrounds, right? Like the paper, those are vector. And then aside from that, everything is departure mono. So even this texture here in this ID and here, these are just using the font to, this is like showing I guess, a photo from the newspaper clipping. And then, yeah, so that was really fun to play around with. Oh yeah, here too,
Yep.
in the boarding pass, there's a little bit of texture. So
Yep, yep. Actually, was it K10K? There used to be websites where you could download background patterns that tiled essentially,
mm,
and you'd see something very similar to this, and a lot of them were in pixel art form.
yeah,
Ah, there you have something very
yeah, I
similar there.
remember that. There's a lot of good, a lot of stuff to get into with patterns and everything from, these are my personal references that I collect these security patterns inside envelopes. If you look in there, there's some really beautiful ones, like this wood grainy one,
Yeah.
and
Yep. There's an AI
yeah,
tool that came out, I think probably in the last couple of weeks actually, where it's all really about how do you create dithered images from it. And yeah, the way I always like, when I talk to some, friends who weren't around back in the day to do design and things like that, I was explaining like one of the easiest ways I had back then to create something similar to this was Fireworks was a great tool back then.
mm,
And you could always export as a GIF and choose the number of colors you wanted to be able to export the image as. And so if you kept it as a high number, then the image would be more photorealistic as best as it can be. But if you went down to like 4 colors or 2 colors, the algorithm had to figure out, how do I take all these pixels and simplify down to 1 or 2 colors? The output almost always would be pixel art, even for more traditional things, because you only had 2 colors. So it'd be giant blocks. It'd be geometric in terms
right,
of, there are no circles, because you had circles, you needed some kind of anti-aliasing, which you couldn't get with just 2 colors. So it always just deferred to only block designs. And I said that was the fastest way back then. So all the things that you're doing right now, I've had it back then, but no one knows about it because people don't use Fireworks. The product has been discontinued for a long time. I don't
right,
even think it
yeah,
works on any modern operating system anymore.
yeah. But it's a similar idea to how you would achieve this fact today, right? Like you would bring it into your software and like flatten out the number of, or flatten it to bitmap and flatten out the number of colors and such. So
Yeah, but this is definitely more
yeah,
advanced though, because I don't think Fireworks would have known to adjust the spacing of various values to create the visual effect of like maybe a gradient for the sky. It would have just been very binary. Is there, does the
hmm,
pixel have certain colors beyond a certain threshold? If it doesn't, it's just white. Otherwise, it's going to be black. So in this case, what Fireworks would have printed would have been the bridge, and some of the key shapes would have been visible, but everything would have just been like solid white.
yeah,
So it's
yeah.
definitely more advanced
This
today.
For sure. This article is wonderful, by the way. It goes through different, there's different kinds of algorithms, right, for dithering, and you could do it in different ways. There's not like one way to do it. So there's different results you can produce, different kinds of noise that you can, achieve. So yeah, this is great.
Very, very cool. Now, when it comes to, I've always been a consumer of fonts. I've never actually created my
Mhm.
own font. What tool do you use to create the font? Like what, when you decide to take a visual and translate into something that your computer understands as a font,
Mhm.
how do you go about that?
I use glyphs.
Okay.
There's various tools out there. I found Glyphs really, actually, I love it. It's very intuitive to use. I can give you a quick preview here. Um, so for because this is a pixel font, I think I largely worked directly in the canvas here. Um, I did do I did a few paper sketches on gridded paper to kind of work out like how big is the grid and questions like that. Um, and so I think probably it would be a combination of sketching and then working within the software. And in this case, you can see the pixels here directly.
Very neat. And you essentially have the same kind of view for every letter or character you're trying
Hmm.
to generate, and then
Yes.
Glyph, the app takes care of putting them all into a format, whatever the font format is, and having it be recognized by your operating system.
Yeah. There's pretty robust exporting features here. There's a lot of like advanced automation and things you can do, and depending on what you're trying to do, there's like you can make a variable font in here. There's a lot of stuff. Um, but you
How
can
long
see
did it take
here,
for you
yeah,
end to end to come up with the idea and actually draw the pixels for each of the characters you were going to be representing?
yeah, end to end. So I started this project about 2 years ago, and I worked on it a little bit. Probably I might have picked it up in the middle somewhere, and then more recently this year is when I finished it. And if I were to map it to a full time job, it might be around 2 months, including the website. But that's not an accurate way to say it, right? Because the breaks in between are important. So, having being able to walk away and really like, it's like I can't see this anymore. Let me walk away, and then I come back to it. And so yeah, the breaks were important. But I think all in all, my time spent in this software is probably not so long.
Yeah, I
But
mean, letting
lots
your
of
mind
research, as you
wander
can see.
is probably one
Yeah,
of the
for
best
sure.
ways to be creative, and so that works out really well.
Yeah, definitely letting your mind wander, and also just being able to see something fresh again. I think that's one of the hardest things about making anything, right? Is like at a certain point you can't see it anymore. So you can't even tell if it's good or not. So giving yourself a little bit of space is important.
Yeah, I noticed that you have eBoy listed there as part of it.
Ah,
One of my colleagues,
super
very
exciting.
recently, I was chatting with him, and he actually had posters from eBoy in his background. I was like, hey, you don't have an eBoy poster. Didn't
Really?
really do you realize that? And then we had a great chat just talking about what we lost in just this kind of art style that isn't really popular anymore. You just don't see it, except for them for the
Hmm.
most
Hmm.
part.
Yeah, there's a lot of different pixel art happening these days. I think this is a very particular style. Um, yeah, I love this like isometric, um, really fun, bright colors. But I'm sure somebody's doing it. It's just there's a lot of interesting things happening. It's about discovering it, and sometimes it can be hard to discover, but kind of have to go into some rabbit holes sometimes.
Yeah, and I just like sometimes just wake up one day going like, what is that one website I remember seeing from like 20 years ago that I completely forgot? And one of them was, I don't, this is probably me dating myself heavily here. There was a
Mhm.
website where people built floors of an apartment, almost like a crowdsourced style, and we just, people would just stack it up on top of each other. And over a period of time, it was like you scroll this massive page. I think it was called, yes,
Huh.
Mr. Wong's apartment. Mr. Wong.de was the URL. And that website is still around right now. And
Yeah, it's
it's
live.
live. Yeah, let me send it to you. I'll send it to you. And what's the fast? Oh, there's a chat here. We have chat right here. Do we?
Let's
And
see here.
but I think if you just search for Mr. MRWONG.de, you'll see it. Oh, the website, the homepage is exactly the way it was like back in the day. Yeah,
Yeah.
if you hit enter.
All right, the splash pages. I forgot about that.
Yep, 2003. All right,
Okay. Oh,
and
here we go. Wow, it's still live.
still live. And let's see, where? How do we get to the apartments themselves from there?
But this is what you were saying back in like the widths of our websites were so narrow because they
Yes,
didn't
they
need to be this
were.
wide. Now my resolution is so big that this doesn't even cover half the screen. I'm going to zoom in
Yeah,
for
I'm
anyone
trying to
watching
find
here.
like how do we get to the apartments? Because I got there from just like going to the URL directly, but yeah, if you want, you can go to the URL bar and just do slash
Uh-huh.
Mr. Wang.de instead of index1.htm. If you just type in slash myhouse, my house, and hit enter, you can
My
now
house.
see people who built it. And the funny thing is, I can see the names of some people who posted there,
Oh
and a
wow.
lot of them are people from back then who did a lot of pixel art.
Wow, this is really cool. I actually
Yeah,
don't know if I remember this, but
and
this
I
is
should be
oh
there
that's
somewhere because I created a few floors and submitted it, and it was actually featured here as well. This is back when I
okay,
had a
let's take
lot
a
of
look.
free time to create pixel art just for the just for the fun of it.
Look how long this scroll is. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was amazing. I remember, and this inspired me to create my own pixel city actually in the exact same format. People could actually crowdsource and create pixel. I basically had plots of land and people could claim it for themselves all for free. And then they could create the land as well. And if you search for Krupa, I think it was called Krupaville, Krupaville.
Hmm.
That was like back then, like people could create this like massive, it was before Google Maps was a thing. You could really scroll this like large canvas and everyone created their own plot of like, house or building inside of it. But these were like some of the fun things from the pixel art days that always struck out. So every now and then, I would just wake up going like, wonder what happened to that website. And this is when I discovered again, like maybe a month or so ago, I was like, okay, I need to find it. And I had no recollection of it. I searched for like pixel apartments and I couldn't find it anywhere else. And it took me like just a lot of like random searching over a period of a couple of days to land upon this again. Because as you can tell, it's not SEO friendly. Everything's an image. There's no text you can actually
Mm-hmm.
select and click
Yeah,
on.
I wanted to search for you, but I can't because
Yeah,
this is not
exactly,
like
right. But
text.
I'm definitely there. There should be at least two floors. At least I remember back then it was there. I'm pretty sure it wasn't removed because it hasn't been maintained or updated in all this time.
Yeah. Wow.
But I do love this because it does kind of, it's almost a snapshot of a period of time that people probably forgot already existed. It's, I love watching like archaeological dig site documentaries on TV. Most of the time it's like completely lost, it's like they had recreated and so on. But this is like a perfect representation of this old city that people never knew existed. So yeah.
Yeah, wow. What a time capsule. This is so
And I did
cool.
also notice when you went to his homepage, the links on the right hand side, like, there was a thing back then. You link to like your favorite inspirational sites and so on, like versus departure. Like a lot of
Uh-huh.
those websites were all like, if you scroll up a little bit, like the grid of icons, you can see
Right here.
eBoy, of course, but then like I remember Pixel Freak being a classic one from back in the day, and I think Miomi as well. And so those are little things that I remembered from that era where you had pixel
Oh.
art all over the place.
I just love that these are still live.
I
That
know,
is really
right?
cool.
And the
Yeah.
with the pixel figure, like, wait, why is the site like only on the left hand side? Back in the day, that would have been like 50% of the screen, like on a 640 by 480 monitor. And so
Right.
this is very much this is very much just one of those things where people today are going like, what are you looking at? This makes absolutely no sense. But if you live through it, you can recognize
Yeah.
why it was done that way. And yeah, even the gradient in the background was, it's not exactly a smooth gradient. It's very much one where deliberately done with fewer colors to create the dithering effect that you highlighted a moment ago.
Hmm.
Yeah, but you can see the font, the chance in the font because it's pretty much illegible on the left hand side. Because for back in the day, this would have been this size for most of our monitors, but now all of us are in like 1920 by 1080 at the minimum, if not much greater beyond it. So the fonts had to evolve to be nicer, which is where I think Departure Mono and the more modern Pixel fonts that have come out really shine.
Hmm. Yeah, this is probably a better simulation of what it would have looked like. I mean, it would have probably filled most of the screen here.
Yeah, I need to like
Um,
also go on LinkedIn and see like what this person is up to. I periodically do contact some of these people, going like, "Hey, I loved your stuff from like 20 years ago," and then we always end up having fun conversations about this.
yeah, that's really fun.
But no, the eBay posters are great because they're still relevant. They still actually, I think they're a lot of companies, at least I've seen Google doing it a few times, where they use them to for any event they're having in a particular city. Actually, hire them to create a pixel montage of whatever city they're currently doing an event in, and those have always been big hits. I always want people to be like loving it because, especially developer audiences, because they recognize the value of like pixel style font for most of it's like nostalgic purposes, really. But it resonates with them, and so I've seen a lot of conferences where the eBoy posters are always featured.
Oh yeah, that's cool. Yeah, these are some modern, you know. I think there was that particular style we were just looking at, and then you can see today some interpretations and artists working in different kind of pixel art. I mean, there's some really cool stuff.
Yeah, very
Um,
much so.
you know, let's see. I've been poking around. But yeah, some really beautiful stuff out there.
Wow, this
So
is
yeah.
fantastic. Because I think the one of the big changes I've seen in kinds of pixel art is that back then the pixel art was a combination of two things. It was part of like the isometric art style where everything's on a 30, 60, 90 kind of an angle, and that also just happened to be represented in pixel art form. But what we've seen since then, I think, is a decoupling of those things. You can have pixel art, but you don't have to have the isometric grid as a part of it. And so some of the examples you had of some of the games,
Mhm.
for example, they're on the 30, 60, 90 grid to kind of take you back the nostalgic feel of it, but the art style isn't exactly pixel art. So you have this combination now where you see both of it, but it still does a nice job capturing what it was back in the day for what would be
Right.
considered modern pixel art. Yeah, but
Yeah.
Habbo Hotel's
Yeah.
classic. They still follow the 30, 60, 90 pattern for
Hmm.
how they represent all the lines, and they're also pixel art style. So I think they're probably one of the few remaining ones that are actively investing in that kind of space. I think even eBoy, they use vectors for a lot of their visuals, I think.
Yeah. I see. Yeah. There's so you're seeing a lot of these like higher definition. I mean, this is all pixels. How incredible is that?
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
But no, I think there's a lot of really fun stuff that people are creating. A lot of good animation work as well. It's being done in After
Hmm.
Effects
Yeah.
of pixel art work. Like I forget who the designer. I think he goes by the initials DK. I think he's a Korean designer, and he recently
Hmm.
had a pretty well attended show in New York. And also he does various installations. Let me see if we can find a link for that. I know we're geeking out on this, but
Yeah. I mean,
DK
it's really
anime.
fun.
Yeah, it's DEEKAY Decon.
DEE
KAY, DK Motion.
KAY.
Yep. And a lot of his work is a combination of pixel art and animations. I see him on LinkedIn all the time, but he also posts on Instagram, of course. You see a lot of it. And some of his, yeah, like some of these are just fantastically done.
Mm. Wow. That's so fun.
Yeah, like every frame has some nostalgia in it. Like you saw Mega Man, and you saw like the worms from not the worms, the caterpillars from Super Mario World, but it was vector format.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the benefit today of we can still achieve that pixel effect and let's say use a pixel font, but we have the benefits of modern technology and modern screens, and we can use it at different sizes, right? And I mean, given a high res screen, you could have more flexibility with the font, and you don't have to exactly use it at the pixel size that it was created at.
Exactly, because I think back then there was no alternative, especially if you looked at early computer graphics in the 80s and 90s, like for example, highlighted from the movie interfaces in like a lot of these things, you had no choice. That was the only option you had. Whereas today we have the luxury of being able to pick and choose from the various art styles that have been really popular over the decades and optimize for what you want to do. And I think that's the part that's actually the most exciting part of it, because even if you look at DK's work, it combines techniques and styles from so many eras very nicely because you can. Why not take the best
Hmm.
of what works and be able to do the right thing at the right moment?
Yeah, this is really fun.
So what's next for you? You have the fantastic icon library, and you mentioned you want to keep expanding some of the character set in Departure Mono. But
Hmm. Hmm.
what are you thinking about doing next?
Yeah, so currently working on Cyrillic for Departure Mono. I was also thinking of maybe learning about variable fonts and expanding. I mean, I don't even know how much it makes sense for a pixel font to be variable, but as we just said, right, there's technology we can leverage and we can kind of blend styles and techniques. So
At least selfishly,
potentially,
I would say there's a huge place for that because
yeah.
readability, if you have like large blocks of text, especially reading like English or like, like language work, I always found
Hmm.
monospaced fonts to not be the most legible of things. So even on my personal blog, all my heading fonts are a pixel font. And I experimented greatly with like what kind of font can I use for like having large bodies of text be, can I find a pixel font for it? And I was never quite thrilled with the monospaced variation. So I think there is a world where this could be applicable.
Yeah. So potentially of, I mean, I would have to figure out a way to make, let's say, a bolder weight or maybe a wider, like there's a lot of different kind of axes that you can work with. Um, or like more glitch. What if glitch was an axis and you can make it more glitchy or something?
Yes.
So maybe playing around with that, but we'll see. Um, Definitely continuing with Phosphor, the icon library, and I'm inspired actually to get into some pixel art after talking about all this stuff with you and recently digging into this more. Yeah, I'm inspired to maybe try my hand at some of this stuff too and see what's my unique blend of pixel art.
Yeah, no, pixel art, it's just game. I think it's a nostalgic factor for me, but I think the style is still, clearly as we see, resonates very strongly with a large audience even today, given how much we see it in pop culture.
Yeah, it's not going away anytime soon. So
Yeah, I hope not. Even if it is, like, there'll be a handful of us who still keep dragging the corpse of this art style forward as much as we can.
there's always going to be someone listening to vinyl records, right? So yeah,
Exactly,
if that's
exactly.
us.
And hopefully the overlap is growing as well in the future.
Hmm.
Is there anything else that you feel that we should highlight and talk about in terms of what you've created? Anything you have on your mood board that we didn't cover fully?
Let's see. I think we did a pretty good job here, bouncing around, and of course, there's so much more to talk about. But we can continue the conversation another time. Um, I think what I want to drive home with this mind map is how much. I mean, how much research goes into something like this, and how fun it is to kind of go through these different rabbit holes. And um, if you're to when you're embarking on your next creative project to really obsess to find something you're interested in and obsess about it and something good will come out of that.
Fantastic. And you know what else I absolutely loved about our conversation? We
Mhm.
never mentioned artificial intelligence even once, which I think
Yes,
is
well,
like,
now we did.
oh, now I did,
Yeah,
exactly. But
yeah,
it
yeah,
was mostly just to kind of reference that I didn't reference it as opposed to
yeah,
it being a
yeah.
featured part of
I
it.
love
So,
that. I
so
love
I think
that. This
that's
is
a
kind of
huge,
it's kind of the antithesis of artificial intelligence, right? Like manually placing pixels one by
exactly.
one. Yeah.
Yeah, there's just something nice about seeing this happen. So, well, Helena, it was great chatting with you. Love the font, love the icons, and I can't wait to see all the other cool things that you're doing. And definitely we'll chat more about other topics in the near future.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me.